My question is to the Premier, Mr Speaker. What are the key benefits the Premier sees as resulting from his university merger plan, as opposed to what our institutions currently provide for South Australia?
The Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. The state government, or the now state government, but then opposition, committed some years ago now to go to the election with a policy to pursue university amalgamation. The intent of the policy, well, in terms of the method of the policy, we committed at the election more specifically to establish a university amalgamation commission, should that be required in order to achieve that objective. Since then, the government has been very grateful for the fact that the University of Adelaide and the University of South Australia have come together to actively pursue the proposition of them creating a new university, as they have in the past. This time, of course, what they are in receipt of is support from the government, both in terms of principle, but also in terms of willingness to aid that effort as best as we can. The objective of the policy, Mr Speaker, first and foremost, is to increase the capacity of a new university to undertake research in the community. And the second principal objective that the government has, Mr Speaker, is to improve accessibility of the university. I think on this side of the House, we fervently believe, sir, that education is the most powerful tool at any government's disposal to provide opportunity to as many young people in our community as possible. It literally has the power to turn around lives. Higher education is an important element of that equation, and obviously universities speak to that. If we can improve both accessibility of the university but also improve the volume of research that is undertaken in our state, then we are on a trajectory to improve the economic complexity of South Australia. That means better jobs. Better jobs means better pay and more secure work. They are the principal aims of the policy. Now, in this regard, in order to pursue both of those things, sir, size does matter. We know that even today, out of the top universities in Australia, as per the QS rankings that were released in the last 24 hours and appeared in The Australian this morning, that the major top universities from Australia that appear in those rings, the highest ranked universities, are the largest universities because, of course, the volume of research undertaken at those institutions informs their outcomes. We need more research undertaken in South Australia, and by freeing up the ability of universities to have the volume of research that underpins yet more growth in that area, that is wholeheartedly a good thing. Of course, one of the main sources of revenue for universities, Mr Speaker, revenue that actually underpins the volume of research that is undertaken by universities, is international students. If we can increase the number of international students, not at the expense of our capacity to educate students domestically clearly, but if we can attract more international students to South Australia, that brings a range of economic benefits that have been spoken about in this place on numerous occasions, but it also means more revenue for universities themselves. That gives them the ability to invest a lot more in research. I think there is it is, in some respects, Mr Speaker, unfortunate that international student revenue has been critical to research funding in our country, but nonetheless, that is the system that we operate in. We have to participate within that system, and we have to have the ambition to grow research in our state from that source of revenue. The final point I make, Mr Speaker, in the 30 seconds I've got left, is it's too well known that in this state we have actively contemplated the university amalgamation question over decades. All too often that can has been kicked down the road, often for reasons that aren't consistent with the state's interests. This government will not abide that. We are determined to pursue this policy, and we look forward to an outcome in the not-too-distant future.
The Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Premier. Can the Premier advise the House what cost-benefit analysis has informed the Government's current plan to pursue a university merger? And with your leave, sir, and that of the House, I will explain.
Leave sought his leave granted.
Yes, sir.
The Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Labour Party's election commitment was to establish a University Merger Commission which would explore the risks and costs, as well as the benefits and opportunities of a realignment of our tertiary institutions. After the election, the government instead entered into direct negotiations with Adelaide University and the University of South Australia.
Premier.
Thanks, Mr Speaker, and I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. And I do want to thank the Opposition for their interest in this subject matter, because it is of material significance to the state. Mr Speaker, the universities, the work that has been undertaken over the course of the last 6 months has been led by the universities themselves. Naturally, there has been engagement with the state government, given that we have a substantial interest in the policy outcome. But each university, both in conjunction with each other but also crucially independently of each other, have been undertaking their own work around the cost-benefit analysis of the creation of a new university between both Adelaide and the University of South Australia. It is important that each university council forms a view consistent with the best interests of those institutions individually. But it's also important, and I think appropriate, that those institutions think about the long-term interests of the state as a whole, which is our only consideration in terms of government. Naturally, we have a different imperative than what they may have individually. But nonetheless, if the University of South Australia, and it isn't if, there are active deliberations underway at the moment, but if the University of South Australia and the University of Adelaide independently arrive at their own view that the creation of a new university is in the interests of those institutions and their students, as well as being in the interests of the state, then clearly that is something that we would wholeheartedly support. We announced that we were putting the University Amalgamation Commission on hold upon receipt of the news that those two universities were engaging with each other and undertaking that work. We understand, I'm happy to say publicly, we understand that both universities have done their own business cases, they've done their own active consultation, and they've done their own very deliberate analysis that it will be subject of review and then subsequently a decision from those two university councils, and the government awaits the outcome of that endeavour.
Supplementary question from the Leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And this is again to the Premier. The Premier referred to business cases and cost-benefit analysis being undertaken by the two universities. Will the Premier commit to initiating an independent review of those cost-benefit analysis or business cases, and if not, why not?
The Premier.
No, they are matters for the universities themselves. They're their pieces of work. That is not work that is owned by the government. But what I will say, Mr Speaker,
Order.
What I will say, Mr Speaker, is that the prospect of South Australia being home to the largest educator of domestic students in the country does excite us. The prospect of such a large basis of domestic students being educated here, being able to grow into the future with a clear eye on equity, with a clear eye on accessibility, does excite us. The prospect of using that as a base to underpin yet more growth in international students coming to South Australia from countries that we engage with, and then bringing that source of income to underpin a growth in research in South Australia, that excites us. The idea of more South Australian students getting access to a world-leading institution that gradually, over years to come, makes its way up the rankings so that South Australians are in receipt of one of the most sought-after pieces of paper anywhere in the world, and then applying that learning to be able to pursue the extraordinary economic opportunities going our way, that excites us. Now, Mr Speaker, let me be clear about something that is well known, and that is there will be people and there will be those who are opponents of the idea of the creation of a new university. That is nothing to be surprised at. Those opponents have been around for as long as this idea has been on the cards. What is new here is A, potentially those universities forming their own opinion that now is the time for them to come together for the benefit of their own institutions and the state. And secondly, that they have the prospect of doing that with a government that has got their back, with a government that is willing to be innovative, bold, a government that is willing to potentially invest with universities because we appreciate the value of higher education. We appreciate the power that tertiary education provides to young people in our state to be able to participate in the economy of tomorrow. A government that is willing to lead. We are not going to be a government that gets approached by universities and says, look, we believe that...
Premier, there's a point of order from the member for Moree Alta. I anticipate order. Members to my left and right. I'll hear the member for Moree Alta, who I anticipate is going to draw my attention to the fact that our timing device...
No, sir. I was drawn to Standing Order 98. The Kennedy bit aside, the question was actually specifically about a review of the university's business cases.
Very well, member for Moree Alta. I'll listen carefully. Order. Member for West Torrens is called to order. Order. I'll listen carefully. I observe. Order. Premier, you have 2 minutes. Premier.
Given the, I think the time. Thanks for speaking. So, but in the event that the universities do arrive at the conclusion they would like to create a new one, and the government is able to facilitate that, then as the Deputy Leader of the Opposition referred to in a recent Indalia article, there will be a need for legislation. This is something that the Deputy Premier, of course, has been turning her mind to in great detail. And of course, if in the event that the...
Order. Order. Member for Morford. Order.
If in the event that the universities do arrive at that conclusion, there will be a need for legislation to be introduced into the parliament, and that will be an opportunity for all and sundry to be able to see the formation of that, and for the opposition to scrutinise, as they absolutely should, that proposition. But it will also be an important test for everybody in this parliament, an important test of whether or not we are committed to making the bold decisions into the future to set the state up for the long term, or whether or not we're going to, only contemplate the sort of hold-back mentality that could deprive a new institution being formed in a way that they both want. And that would be an extraordinary thing for people in this place to actively consider doing. We on this side of the House are on the side of progress. We on this side of the House are about advancing the state's interest into the long term, and we're willing to make those decisions accordingly.
Order. Member for Moree Alta.
So my question is to the Premier. Does Treasury have funds set aside for a contribution to the university merger? And with your leave, sir, and out of the House, I'll explain.
Leave orders leave granted. Member for Moree Alta.
Thank you, sir. The budget handed down last sitting week contains no identified provision for the university merger, despite identifying in the budget statement that funds have been set aside for the new National Skills Agreement and for the delivery of 3-year-old preschool, pending the completion of the National Agreement and the Royal Commission, respectively. No such provision have I found for the university merger.
Treasurer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Deputy Leader for his question. I'm grateful on the second day of sitting after the release of the budget to finally get a question about the budget.
Order.
Maybe you're entirely relaxed about it. No complaints.
Member for Colton. Member for Chafee.
No complaints.
Order.
No complaints.
Too much like hard work.
Member for West Torrens. Treasurer has the call.
But I am grateful to him because he is right to point out, and he's clearly, potentially unlike some of his colleagues, he's clearly been assiduously reading the budget papers, and I think that that's a good thing to do, that the budget has got specific provisions set aside for those initiatives that he mentioned before, in particular 3-year-old preschool, and without going into too much detail about that, as I've already said, we'll make our allocations more formal once we've got the Royal Commission report and the recommendations of the Royal Commission report. What I can say to the Deputy Leader is in setting the budget, putting the budget together, we have ensured that the budget settings have got sufficient room to make a contribution to the universities in the event that they should agree amongst themselves to pursue a merger. And we would only provide that support on the basis that they both resolve that it was in their interests, and that we could be confident our support would deliver the aims of a merged institution. And obviously we would want to understand from the universities what their expectations would be in that event. But given that it's not yet an eventuality, given that it's only a potential, not an outcome, not a foregone conclusion, we have not set out a particular quantum of funding in the budget papers for that purpose.
Supplementary, Member for Morialta.
Thank you, sir. The Treasurer in his response described there being sufficient room for there to be a contribution to the university merger. Given that, has the Cabinet determined the quantum that would be available for such a contribution? And indeed, has the government talked about that contribution to the universities?
Treasurer.
Well, I'm clearly not going to disclose what Cabinet has considered or what the discussions have been in Cabinet, but I can reaffirm my advice to the House that the government is comfortable, as we've gone about the process of framing the budget, that should we need to make a contribution towards a merged institution on the basis that the two institutions separately agree to pursue a merger and that we understand the basis of those decisions that they respectively take and what their expectations of government are, we have put the budget together on the basis that we would have sufficient capacity to make a contribution towards those efforts.
Very well.
To the Treasurer or the Premier, can the government rule out that that contribution would be used to fund staff redundancies at the two existing universities?
Treasurer.
Well, again, we haven't got a decision from the universities, so we're talking about hypotheticals, but I can't imagine that we would look to commit any of our funding for that sort of purpose. I suspect in the alternative, what the government, well, I don't suspect, I know that our thinking has been if the two universities were to make a decision separately that they wanted to pursue this, if we make any contribution, it would be in the effort to support such a merged institution delivering over and above what the two separate entities have been able to do themselves separately to date. And I don't see that us specifically funding staff redundancies would fit into that line of thinking.
Member for Newland.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Premier. How is the Malinauskas government supporting highly skilled defence jobs for the future?
Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for Newland for a question. In fact, I was very happy earlier this morning to be with the Deputy Premier down at Osborne talking to people employed by BAE Systems working on the Hunter-class frigate program, and had the opportunity to be able to meet with apprentices who themselves were from the northeastern suburbs, may well have been in the seat of Newland. But it was really quite a heartening experience to be with Deputy Premier to see the progress that BA has made over a pretty short time, particularly around the ramp-up of the number of people that they now employ, over 1,000 people. It's an extraordinary effort to be able to employ over 650 more just in the last 12 months, given the status of the labour market in South Australia. You can't find a business anywhere at the moment without them complaining about how hard it is to find people. Imagine trying to find 650 during that very period. But to add to the size of the challenge, BAE Systems are going to employ an additional 2,000 people, which is almost twice as many that worked at Holden at the point of its closure between now and 2026. Their ability to be able to do that will in no small way be underpinned by a collaborative relationship they have with the state government that is actively investing in education, training and skills, with a very clear eye on the opportunities that we know are coming our way. Now, the Minister for Education and Skills in particular, along with the Deputy Premier, have been formulating a range of policy interventions to assist us in that regard. And the one that I think is the most exciting for a young person out there in the community at the moment is that in the member for Cheltenham's electorate, there's a technical college being built as we speak that has enrolments open today, that will be open at the beginning of the school year, where any young person can enrol in the advanced manufacturing course, and should they complete that course at the end of their studies, they get a job at BAE Systems, a well-paid job, a secure job, a job that will last for a long time to come. And that is just one example of the type of innovative policy efforts that this government is undertaking to partner with a company like BAE. But we are going to need to do a lot more, Mr Speaker, because we know that the sheer volume of people that are going to be required is going to increase into the future. So the government is undertaking a number of actions that are under active pursuit at the moment, including reaching an agreement with the Commonwealth regarding land swap, where we hand over to the Commonwealth as a state government land down at Osborne, and that will facilitate them building a brand new academy that will train thousands upon thousands of people to work in the naval shipbuilding industry. And then in exchange, the state government is pursuing land at sites such as Coltana and Keswick, sites that will underpin our expansion into the future in the hydrogen sector, being critical land that the state government has never been able to get access to in the past despite some efforts, but also the ability to acquire the Keswick barracks site, which could be an incredibly strategic piece of land used for innovative housing policy, but also potentially useful strategically for the state government as an innovative precinct. These are the types of pursuits that the state government is engaged in, as well as the pursuit of the creation of a new university, where we've already been able to secure additional Commonwealth-supported places that are worth a lot of money to the state government as part of that effort. This government is leaving no stone unturned into supporting the naval shipbuilding opportunity in our state.
Before I call the leader, I acknowledge the presence of Emily Meyer in the gallery, who's performing work experience in the Opposition Whip's office from St Martin's Lutheran College in Mount Gambier, and also Jackie Bateman, an internationally acclaimed photographer, guest of the member for MacKillop. The leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Premier. Has the Premier told universities that if they do not voluntarily agree to a merger, he will force them to merge involuntarily?
Premier.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. We've made clear that our University Amalgamation Commission is on hold, given that there is discussions being undertaken between Adelaide Uni and University of South Australia independently of the government. Naturally, we are seeking to be party to those discussions in terms of the government supporting that effort, but our University Amalgamation Commission is on hold pending the outcome of those negotiations.
Order. Order. The leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Premier. What campuses will be retained and what campuses will be closed under the government's university merger plan?
That question, of course, is potentially argumentative. However, there is no point of order. The Premier has risen, and I'll turn to the Premier.
Happy to, Mr Speaker. The government's clear ambition with the potential creation of a new university is to grow a new university, Mr Speaker, which means a greater presence in the community. So this government is determined to pursue the policy accordingly.
Order. The leader.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is again to the Premier. How does the Premier respond to staff and community members concerned about the government's university merger plan? And with your leave, sir, and that of the House, I will explain.
His sword is leave granted. The leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A survey of more than 1,000 staff by the National Tertiary Education Union found 75% were opposed to the merger plan, with many expressing particular disappointment at the poor process and lack of consultation. And a survey of nearly 2,000 South Australians by the opposition found significant opposition to the use of taxpayer funds being used for the merger. The NTEU SA Division Secretary said, and I quote, "The process must be evidence-based. It needs to be managed with the strictest public oversight protections and stakeholder engagement mechanisms imaginable. Getting this wrong would be catastrophic for South Australia."
Deputy Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I had an interesting meeting with the NTEU recently about that survey and about the merger process, or the proposition that there might be the creation of a new university in South Australia. And it was interesting to me the amount in which the Leader of the Opposition is leaning on a survey to which 90% of staff did not respond. And 20% of the respondents came from Flinders University, which is not currently in any sort of discussion about merger. Now, I'm not at that point dismissing the feedback, the legitimate feedback, from those staff who did choose to participate in the survey, but let's understand that this is a self-selecting response. This isn't a random survey of 10% of staff across 3 universities.
Order. Member for Morialta.
It is a survey that, to which 90% of staff chose not to respond, and those who did, doubtless, are the ones who are more...
Member for Morialta is warned. Deputy Premier has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for your protection. Nonetheless, clearly there is a small number of people who are involved in the 2 universities who are currently working through a feasibility study process who have some concerns. I understand that. The way in which the university sector has been treated by the federal government over the last 10 years, for example, until the Anthony Albanese government was elected, was a disgrace. The war of the Morrison government against universities has meant that university staff and management have felt under siege. Let's not forget the way in which international students were treated by the Morrison government when COVID hit, for example. And I would say, in contrast with the now opposition and then government, who were supportive of international students during that time alongside the universities, and I congratulate them for that. But nonetheless, that does not take away from the effect of Canberra's attitude towards universities for those last 10 years. So I understand there's a degree of anxiety and concern. I believe it to be misplaced. As I said to the NTU, and I'm happy to say now, there is a proposition to consider creating a new university that will be high equity and research intensive. It will be large enough to attract significant research dollars, and let's not forget that for every dollar that's attracted to research, nearly $10 is spent in the private sector. So let's not try to dismiss the importance of attracting more research dollars here. Let's not forget that we have well under our population percentage of researchers in South Australia in comparison to our population share, and we can do better. And one way we can do better is to have a university of mass that is high research intensivity, that will be globally ranked well, and has a large enough student body that it is able to attract more and from a more diverse student base and attract more international students. These are goals that all of us should think are worthy. And in fact, at a time, the opposition expressed that if they thought that if the universities thought this was a good idea, that they'd be happy to support it. That seems to have evaporated, unfortunately, along with the general idea that maybe we could occasionally be bipartisan about the growth and prosperity of this state.
Member for Colton, member for Schubert. Order. Member for Schubert. Deputy Premier has the call.
So to return to the nub of the question about the anxiety, I have responded in detail to the NTEU. I will continue to discuss with staff. I think it's misplaced, and I don't think it's significantly held.